They didn't knock, they didn't call ahead, they stormed in like enforcers claiming territory, clipboards pressed against their chests like shields, sunglasses hiding whatever humanity might still be left behind their eyes. I hadn't even unpacked half the boxes in my living room when they stood in my yard, declaring, not asking, that the dock wasn't mine anymore. One of them smiled the way people do when they believe resistance is already impossible. It belongs to the community now. HOA regulations. That's how it started. 8 words that stripped the warmth out of the morning air and turned my dream home into the stage for a war I hadn't known I'd enlisted in. I'd been awake since before dawn, coffee steaming in my hand, marveling at the lake glowing gold beneath the sunrise. 2 years of sacrifice, saving from a modest government paycheck as a Waterway supervisor, had finally bought me this. A house by the water, quiet mornings, a private dock that stretched into the rippling expanse like an invitation to peace. It was mine in a way nothing else in my life had ever been. And now, less than 48 hours after I'd arrived, they stood there telling me it belonged to them. I said nothing, just nodded, like someone who couldn't hear the roar inside his own chest. But silence doesn't mean surrender. Silence means calculation. Because when people believe you've already accepted their terms, they show you exactly how far they're willing to go. I watched Celeste Morrison that morning, HOA president, pastel sweater, muffins in a basket like some suburban queen disguising her conquest in sugar and politeness. She smiled at me, but her eyes, sharp and merciless, were fixed on the dock, my dock. She called it community property, as if a sentence on a photocopied page could rewrite ownership, erase effort, strip me bare of rights I had worked for. That was the moment I understood something most people never want to see. Neighborhoods aren't always communities. Sometimes they're kingdoms. And behind every polite wave, every forced smile, there's a system waiting to consume the uninitiated. I had just bought myself into an empire I didn't know existed, and Celeste, smiling, humming, pretending to welcome me, was its ruler. She handed me a muffin like it was communion, like accepting it meant I'd agreed to whatever scripture her HOA scribbled on the margins of life. The blueberry crumbled in my palm as she spoke, her voice a syrupy mix of sweetness and command. "We are so pleased to have you here. The dock will be a wonderful space for our gatherings. You've done such a nice job fixing it up for everyone." The dock, again. She said it the way a thief might admire jewelry already slipped into their pocket. The words weren't praise, they were possession. I told her calmly, almost too calmly, that the dock was mine. Paid for, deeded, written in ink older than her presidency. For the first time her smile faltered. Then it returned, harder, stretched tight like plastic over something rotten. "Oh, you must be confused. According to our regulations, all waterfront structures belong to the community. You'll see, it's in the paperwork. We strongly suggest you attend Wednesday's meeting. I'm sure everything will be cleared up." That phrase, strongly suggest, hung in the air like a threat dipped in honey. She didn't need to say the rest. People who ignored her suggestions didn't last here. And then she turned. But before she left, I caught something. The way her eyes lingered on the dock, calculating, hungry, as though she were already redesigning it in her mind for book clubs and tea parties. I swear I heard her murmur those exact words under her breath. Not a neighbor admiring improvements, a ruler claiming spoils. The next morning, the muffins were gone, replaced with fines. Little white envelopes tucked under my door, each one stamped with the authority of the board, each one signed in Celeste's looping, flowery hand. Grass too long, $25. Garbage bin left at curb too late, $50. Mailbox the wrong color, $75. The absurdity almost made me laugh. Almost. Until I realized it wasn't incompetence, it was strategy. Each notice wasn't about lawns or garbage, it was about pressure, conditioning, breaking me down until I accepted the larger theft without a fight. By day 3, I stopped seeing neighbors as people. They became spectators in a theater where the script had already been written. And me? I was cast as the villain who dared to believe his property was his own. Wednesday night arrived like a summons. The community center smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, the kind of sterile place where judgment masquerades as order. 24 neighbors crammed into folding chairs, their eyes darting between me and Celeste as though they'd already chosen sides. The air wasn't heavy with curiosity. It was heavy with verdict. Celeste presided from the head table, flanked by 2 board members who never quite met my gaze. In front of her was a stack of papers, neatly arranged, as if evidence of my crimes had been prepared weeks before I even signed my mortgage. She tapped her finger once against the wood and the room quieted, like schoolchildren awaiting instruction. "The issue before us tonight," she began, "concerns the new residents' refusal to allow community access to our shared waterfront amenity." Shared waterfront amenity, my dock renamed by decree. Her voice carried authority not because of truth, but because no one dared to interrupt. One by one, neighbors rose to speak. Mrs. Patterson clutched her pearls as she accused me of altering community aesthetics with the dock's new color. The Hendersons lamented the unauthorized lights I'd installed, claiming they disturbed the visual harmony of the shoreline. A man I had never seen in my life, declared I, was blocking traditional fishing rights families had enjoyed for generations. Their words sounded rehearsed, like actors reciting lines handed out just before curtain. I waited, listened, let the absurdity pile so high it nearly collapsed under its own weight. Then, when Celeste finally offered me the floor, I stood, calm, precise. My deed includes the dock. I have paid for it, improved it, and maintained it. It is private property, and no one here has the right to claim otherwise. The room erupted. Whispers hissed like static. Some shook their heads. Others laughed under their breath. Celeste's smile returned, but now it gleamed with triumph, not courtesy. "We've always accessed the lake there," she replied, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Your paperwork doesn't change tradition, and this board has never approved your modifications." That's when it struck me. This wasn't about property at all. It was about control. The dock was just the symbol, the rallying point for power dressed up as community spirit. The vote that followed was inevitable. 18 in favor of a violation notice, 2 against, 3 abstentions. And as I walked out into the night, one man brushed past me, whispering 6 words that made my stomach turn. "You're not the first they've pushed out." The first envelope taped to my door carried more weight than its paper should allow. This wasn't a petty fine anymore. This was legal stationery. Anderson and Associates, a firm I'd only heard about in whispered complaints from colleagues who'd fought developers and lost. The letter was clear. Remove all obstructions to community waterfront access within 7 days or face litigation. They weren't asking. They were daring me to resist, calculating that fear of bankruptcy would do what their muffins and fines hadn't. The numbers leapt from the page like blows to the ribs. 15,000 in legal fees, just to begin. 3 to 5,000 in court costs. Up to 10,000 more in punitive damages for disrupting community harmony. $40,000 just for insisting my dock was mine. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about breaking the will of anyone foolish enough to believe ownership was real when the collective decided otherwise. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, and for the first time I felt a chill of real fear. Not because I doubted my rights, my deed was ironclad, but because I knew how the system worked. Courts don't reward truth. They reward endurance, influence, and who can bleed the longest without collapsing. An HOA armed with lawyers and endless pettiness could drain a man like me before a judge ever opened the case file. And yet, as I looked out the window at the dock glowing under the moonlight, the board still painted ocean blue, I felt something shift. Fear hardened into resolve. They wanted me to fold, to sell, to vanish quietly like whoever had come before me. That was their pattern. But I wasn't leaving. Not after everything I'd sacrificed to build this life. The next morning, new posts rose from the waterline like teeth breaking the surface. Surveyor markers, driven deep into the lake bed overnight. Professional work, tagged with codes from a private company, not the county. Someone was preparing construction on my property without so much as a conversation. This wasn't incompetence. This was invasion. And then I saw him. Across the inlet, a man in a fleece vest, clipboard in hand, sunglasses masking his eyes. He didn't wave, didn't move, he just watched. Cold, patient, like a predator studying prey. That was the moment I realized Celeste wasn't the mastermind. She was the mask. The real power hadn't revealed itself yet, but it was watching me. The surveyor posts were more than wood and paint. They were declarations of war. I waded into the lake, the cold water biting my legs, and snapped photos of every tag, every flag fluttering in the morning wind. These weren't amateur markers. This was professional work, the kind developers pay for when they're mapping out a project. Which begged the question, what project required trespassing on my land under cover of night? The anger that had been simmering finally boiled into something sharper. I called Celeste, my voice steadier than I felt. She answered like she'd been waiting, her tone cheerful in the way only someone who thinks they're winning can sound. "Good morning, Mark. I was expecting your call." Expecting my call. That confirmed it. She knew exactly what had been planted in my lake. "Those markers are temporary," she explained, "just for measurement purposes. Our engineering consultant is designing improvements for community access." She said it so casually, as though it were her right to build improvements on land that didn't belong to her. "Improvements?" I repeated. "You mean trespassing? You don't get to build on my property without my consent." That's when her mask slipped again. The sweetness curdled into something venomous. "Mark, you've moved into a neighborhood with traditions. Families here have used that waterfront for decades. You can't buy history out from under people." It wasn't logic, it was ideology. My ownership meant nothing compared to their belief in communal entitlement. To them, the dock was never mine. It was theirs, temporarily stolen, and they were here to take it back. That night I drafted a cease and desist letter, certified mail with signature required, copies sent to the county assessor and sheriff. Every word precise, every phrase legally weighted. If they wanted a fight, I'd drag them into one where paper trails mattered more than muffin baskets. But when I opened my mailbox the next morning, my stomach sank. Nothing was missing, but the lock had been pried open, the metal scarred by something sharp. That wasn't theft, it was a message. Someone wanted me to know they could reach inside my life whenever they pleased. I'd dealt with developers who wanted to drain wetlands. I'd fought city lawyers twisting zoning laws. But this was different. This wasn't just greed. It was personal. Someone had chosen me, my dock, my life, as the battleground. And I had no idea yet just how far they were willing to go. The first real crack in my resolve didn't come from a letter or a vote. It came at 2:17 in the morning. A noise pulled me out of sleep, metal on wood, the faint rhythm of tools against the dock. At first, I thought it was a dream, the mind replaying the day's battles in distorted echoes. But when I pressed my ear to the glass, the truth was waiting. 3 silhouettes crouched at the edge of the lake, their flashlights flickering against the water. They weren't kids pulling a prank. They moved with purpose, steady and silent. One of them carried a crowbar. Another hammered at the surveyor posts. The third just stood there, scanning the shoreline like a lookout. I didn't shout, didn't turn on the lights. I simply raised my phone, recorded what I could through the slats of the blinds. Proof. But in the middle of that shaky footage, one of the men stopped. His head turned toward me, like he could feel the camera lens. He raised his hand slowly, deliberately, and pointed straight at my window. My chest tightened. It wasn't vandalism anymore. It was a message. We see you watching. By the time the sheriff's deputy arrived, they were gone. No footprints, no tools, no evidence beyond the posts leaning at jagged angles. The deputy shrugged, filed a report, and told me it was probably just neighbors working late. His smile was polite, but his eyes said something else. Don't expect us to get involved in HOA business. That's when I realized the walls were closing in. The board had numbers, they had lawyers, and now they had shadows moving in the night, carrying crowbars and silence. This wasn't just about a dock anymore, it was about control through fear. And here's the part you need to understand. Because if you live under an HOA, this could be you. You pay your dues, you keep your yard neat, you follow their rules, until the day you don't. And then you'll discover what I did. It's not a community. It's a machine. One designed to grind down resistance until all that's left is obedience or absence. So when I tell you the real fight hadn't even started yet, believe me, the dock was just the bait. The real war was waiting in the shadows, and they had already chosen me as their example. The breakthrough didn't come from a lawyer or a letter, it came from a slip of paper, half buried in the mud where the surveyors had left their stakes. At first glance, it was nothing, a waterlogged invoice, edges chewed by the lake. But when I dried it out under a lamp, the letterhead made my stomach tighten. Not the HOA, not Anderson and Associates. This was bigger. Clearwater Development Group. I knew the name. Everyone in real estate did. They were sharks, the kind that circled properties for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. They specialized in buying up slivers of land, easements, forgotten rights of way, then flipping them into multi-million-dollar waterfront projects. If their name was tied to my shoreline, it meant one thing. This was never about my dock. It was about the lake. I dug deeper. County records, zoning maps, anything I could pull at 3 a.m. with bloodshot eyes and a stiff drink in my hand. And there it was, filed 6 months before I even moved in. A proposal, pending review for a public access marina. The problem? The only available stretch of shoreline that fit their design was directly where my dock now stood. Celeste hadn't been protecting a community tradition. She'd been clearing the board for a payday. The muffins, the votes, the fines. They were camouflage for a deal already inked behind closed doors. And the HOA? They weren't enemies of Clearwater. They were partners, willing paw. Ones promised prettier landscaping, new amenities, rising property values. If they could just pressure me into folding. That realization settled over me like ice. I wasn't up against neighbors anymore. I was up against money, real money, the kind that builds, buys, and buries anyone who gets in the way. But here's the thing about money. It leaves fingerprints. That invoice was one. The surveyor tags were another. And the men with crowbars? They weren't random shadows, they were contractors, hired hands, paid to rattle me until I broke. They thought fear would be enough. They thought I'd sell, pack up, and disappear. But I'd seen their blueprint now. And once you see the blueprint, you can't unsee it. The dock was no longer just mine. It was leverage. It was the one piece they couldn't buy, bully, or bury without exposing what they really were. And that made me dangerous. When you've worked in real estate long enough, you learn one truth. Sunlight is the most dangerous weapon. Developers thrive in shadows, quiet rezoning meetings, backroom signatures, deals sealed before the public ever hears a whisper. But if you drag those shadows into the open, their power fractures. So that's what I set out to do. First, I copied everything. The invoice, the survey maps, even screenshots of the marina proposal buried in county records. I laid them out in neat stacks across my dining table like pieces of evidence in a trial. If they wanted a war of paper, I would bring an arsenal. Then I went public. Not with lawyers, not yet. With neighbors. I walked door to door the same way Celeste had, except I wasn't carrying muffins. I was carrying receipts. I'll never forget the look on Mr. Alvarez's face when I slid the Clearwater invoice across his porch table. His wife frowned at the marina renderings. Their property, promised improvements, was conveniently located right next to a planned parking lot. Suddenly, the dream of rising property values looked more like headlights flooding their bedroom window every night. It spread from there. Whispers over fences turned into conversations at the cafe. By the end of the week, I wasn't the outsider fighting over a dock. I was the neighbor who uncovered a land grab, and in a community this tightly knit, betrayal cuts deeper than rules ever could. Celeste knew it too. At the next HOA meeting, her smile was gone. She called me reckless, accused me of fear-mongering. But the room didn't rally behind her this time. People asked questions she couldn't answer. Questions about contracts, surveyors, why Clearwater's name appeared on documents no one had been told about. That's when I realized something vital. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of exposure. I leaned into it. I filed formal complaints with the county zoning board, submitted copies of every document, requested they be added to the public record. I CC'd the local paper, not accusations, facts, names, dates, signatures, no spin required. The dock that was supposed to be my weak spot had become my shield. Every attack, every shadow in the night only made me dig deeper, push harder, drag more secrets into daylight. Clearwater and the board thought they were playing chess. But I wasn't their pawn. I was flipping the board over, and the game had only just begun. The first sign that I'd hit a nerve was the silence. No more envelopes, no more fines, no more cheerful hellos from Celeste on her morning walk. For 3 days, nothing. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like the air before a storm, thick, heavy, charged with something waiting to break. Then came the phone calls, blocked numbers, always at night. At first nothing but static, then a voice I couldn't quite place, low and deliberate. You're making a mistake. Click. The next night, people who stir up trouble don't last here. Click. I reported it, of course. The deputy scribbled on his notepad, nodded politely, but his tone was flat. Best to let the HOA handle things internally. Translation: you were on your own. But I wasn't entirely alone. A handful of neighbors, Alvarez, the Donnellys, a young couple new to the block, had started backing me. Quietly at first, then more openly as the documents circulated. They weren't ready to go to war, but they were ready to listen. And that made them targets too. One morning, Mr. Donnelly found nails scattered across his driveway. That same week, Alvarez's mailbox was knocked off its post. Petty acts, small enough to dismiss as coincidence, but we knew better. It was pressure, applied strategically, a warning shot to anyone thinking about siding with me. And still, I pushed forward. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in with a folder thick enough to slam. I laid out every piece of evidence in front of the board. My voice was steady, almost calm, as I explained how Clearwater Development's plans had been in motion long before their community initiative. I watched their faces harden, watched Celeste's eyes flicker to the side toward the men in the back row. Not residents, not neighbors, outsiders, dressed too sharply, watching too closely. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just intimidation, it was escalation. The machine was rolling and I had stepped directly into its gears. Walking home that night, I caught sight of one of those men parked at the corner, engine idling, headlights off. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. They weren't trying to win by rules anymore, they were trying to break me. And I had to decide, was I willing to risk more than fines, more than property, more than sleep, to drag them all into the light?